Ieke, welcome to the Supply Chain College podcast. I'm really glad to have another really great expert, bit of a hidden champion in my opinion, who I also learned only quite late about in the last year, let's say. And I'm really happy that you take the time today to talk to our audience about your supply chain wisdom, a bit about yourself. But enough about my very short intro. I would like to directly hand over to you. So Ieke, maybe you want to introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you, Martin, for your kind introduction already. Let me introduce myself. Ieke Le Blanc. I'm one of the partners at EyeOn. EyeOn is maybe a hidden champion in Germany, but in the Benelux, where we originate from, we are pretty well known in the field of supply chain planning and forecasting. We are a supply chain planning and forecasting company with about 100 consultants all over Europe and in an office in the US. And that's our niche, and that's what we do, and that's what we love to do. So we are a bunch of supply chain geeks that helps companies improve their supply chain planning processes, and that's on the process side, that's on the people side, and that's on the data and analytics side. That's what we like to do, system agnostic. And next to that, I'm connected to the university. I'm a program director at EyeOn, Eindhoven AI and Systems Institute, where I'm responsible for professional education for data science and industry at the Eindhoven Institute of Technology. I love to do cool things with data and data science and artificial intelligence and machine learning and all the buzzwords that are currently around. And I think they will have a big impact in the future on supply chain too. So that makes our field a very interesting one.
Very good. And yeah, you already, in your intro, you demonstrate that you're a very versatile person. So you're lecturing, you're taking care of the trendy topics, etc. But I quickly want to touch on this data science topic. We don't need to deep dive yet. Maybe it comes later in our discussion. But since when are you actually really working on this data science topic? Because a reason why I'm asking, like somebody like me who's not that deep into it, it all came up the last, 2.5 years, big time, also in the professional lives of us in supply chains and in the companies. But I guess you may have worked quite longer already on that. Can you maybe elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, it's a nice question, Martin. When I studied econometrics and operations research. And I think if you talk nowadays about operations research, that term is seldomly heard anymore. But I think that field has evolved in what we now call data science. And I think if we go back in our supply chain world and we, for example, have a look to the first APS systems and the first APS systems that came up 25 years ago. And we also started to talk about solvers and about optimization engines and that kind of work that actually is operations research, because there are linear programmers behind it or mixed integer linear programmers and solving those fast and letting those models work appropriately with the right quality of data. That is something we would call nowadays data science. So I think this field has emerged. I think we have more data, the computational power has increased, the software has become more accessible, making that more and more people get interested in the field, and the amount of students on data science educations at the universities, they are increasing a lot these days.
That's interesting. I never heard such a good explanation. Because I was having a couple of guests here already on operations research. And I also collaborated in my old job at Carlsberg a lot with a university specialized in or having a special branch where they had a good operational research professor and then students, etc. But I never thought about this transition from operations research to data science. So I really like that. When you talk about the students, how can I phrase that? You say there's a lot of data science students and lectures happening and so on. But how do we actually then merge the let's call it old school supply chain and operations and logistics and so on knowledge with this future branches? Or do you actually say we should maybe even not merge it because it's two different disciplines which need to complement then in the business, in the consultancies and wherever each other?
In my view, we should merge because I think the most powerful data scientists or the most powerful data science projects are the ones where domain knowledge is very strongly present. I've seen many projects, both with my consultancy work, but also in mentoring students at the university, where I basically see that if you purely go for the data science, you will fail. A simple example, if you start to work on a forecasting model and you have no idea on what you're forecasting, what the market dynamics is, what type of customers are behind it, and you start to build a forecast model, you can throw in thousands of variables and do a kind of market driver-based forecasting with machine learning, and you will have a very good forecasting model based on your test set and maybe on your train set as well. Or maybe on your train set, but not on your test set, I have to say it correctly. But what will happen in reality, that you have been overfitting your model. So the real performance will lag behind. And I think therefore it's very important that if you start to work with those type of models, you start making use of domain expertise. So what features, what drivers really make impact? What are the ones that you can explain, have an impact on it? And if you find some correlations that you cannot explain, try to understand them before you start using them, because otherwise you have a high risk that you start to use something that is just a correlation by luck and does not imply a causality. And I'm a big fan of those more advanced models with those drivers in it, because I think there is, if you have a driver-based forecasting model with a few drivers, those drivers are also the ones that you need to understand and explain in your IPP process and your S&op process, your demand review. But what I always say is that it is about rewarded versus unrewarded complexity. So if you use such an advanced model, it must be significantly better than a basic statistical model. So next to the forecast value add, where you basically, maybe for the listeners, forecast value add is a measurement where you basically say, hey, how much did I improve my demand forecast by enrichment? And so you ask sales managers to start improving a sales forecast by adding the market and customer knowledge. In the same way, I always say you also need to measure your forecast value add from a machine learning model versus a statistical or a good statistical model. Because it's only when you have a real forecast value add, it is rewarded complexity.
Very good. I have a couple of questions. Maybe I like to go back to the part I understand the most, the people side, because if I look at supply chain management, I believe many functions or professions in supply chain is about people, because still, at least for the next couple of years, until robotics and whatever other things are emerging more and more, it's often about leading big teams of people. Even leading a planning team, planning teams are usually quite big, logistics teams even bigger, production teams also very big, and so on. And I'm thinking a bit maybe unfairly in stereotypes. In my mind, and I know there are the exceptions, the very good exceptions, a nerdy data science versus a people manager who's very sensitive on psychological safety and building teams and asking the right questions and interacting with the business stakeholders outside supply chain. These two stereotypes in my head, they don't fit for the different jobs, if you know what I mean. So there's a stereotype for the data, there's a stereotype for the people. But I think in supply chain, we need to start bringing that together. So do you see in your university or even in the consultancy world, when you help other companies, that actually the kind of youngsters, the new talents coming up in the organizations, that they can live and maneuver well in both worlds and both shoes, or however we say in the right English. But I think you understand what I mean.
I understand what you mean. I have two answers to that one. First, I think that the level in which data scientists need to be mathematical nerds or statisticians is being reduced. I think nowadays with the field of data science, with everything open source, it is also democratizing the knowledge of it, the knowledge of bringing packages, bringing pieces of models together, and it's about configuring those. Then the question is, do you really know what's happening inside those boxes, and is it relevant to know what is inside those boxes? I still believe it is important to know, at least if you would like to do it right. But I still see more and more that just configuration is easier, and that are then also being done by more business savvy people, because you don't need to be a diehard mathematician. That's one part of the answer. For me, the second part of the answer, if I look to large companies, is that they start to bring all those skills together in centers of excellence. Because being a good project manager, being a data scientist, a data engineer, a change manager, someone that can also give solid presentations, that's a unicorn. That person does not exist. So in order to bring all those skills together, and that are skills you need to do a digital transformation to be successful in this journey, you start to build up centers of excellence where you bring those skills together.
Because Also, I sometimes, when on LinkedIn, over the years, I also tried building a network, following certain people with certain expertise. In the last years or so, some experts really talking a lot about these data models, and they receive from a customer whatever so and so many gigabyte of data, and that's how to compute it and this and that. And when I read these posts, I don't understand it. Sometimes I'm actually wondering. I always thought I'm also, sorry, it sounds arrogant, quite smart in some sense and so on, and I'm not that bad in supply chain management and so on. But when I read these posts, I can really not follow it because I never learned it and so on. I wonder. I have turned 42 last month, and I'm working now 25 years because I started very early. 25 years, yeah, because I started early, but I need to work another 25 years or so, depending on what I will do and so on. But so I'm also wondering, what do I need to learn now that I stay in the game and I'm an inspiration for the teams I'm allowed to lead, for my network, for whatever, yeah? Do you have an advice on it, an opinion?
And my opinion here in general is that we have to educate business leaders more and more on what I call AI literacy. And we need to make sure that they understand how the basic concept of those models work, that they become critical thinkers, and that they understand how data is being used. And that doesn't mean that everybody needs to be a super duper data scientist that understands all the techniques. In order to drive a car, you need to know how the car functions. You don't need to know what happens under the hood. You don't need to know how the gearbox works. But you have at least a basic understanding on how to drive a car. Now, I think that's the same with making use of modern technology, and especially now with a lot of AI, which is self-learning, is that we have to have a basic understanding how that works. For example, to provide us also guardrails for when AI starts to hallucinate. AI can do wonderful things, but especially Gen AI can also start to make up stories that are completely not true. And I think we have to be able to distinguish when that happens and when that does not happen. And I think that requires critical thinking. So AI literacy for me is one of the key skills going forward.
I've seen some of my former colleagues, they have undergone, even in management positions, Python trainings.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recommend something like that? And maybe the second question, because then you can answer it in both or both together. Do you see that also training programs at universities, but maybe even like also your consultancy, you're also doing training programs. Do you think there's more and more coming up to actually support what you just said, that to empower, upskill the different ranks in the organizations?
Your question is, should we still learn programming? And my answer is twofold. I think it works very well to learn programming because it's good to understand what it is. But also it's more the conceptual part, and whether it's then Python or R or a different language in itself, it's more how does programming work? And programming languages are also evolving over time. With languages, with programming, it's something you have to practice. If you're not programming every day, every week, then at a certain point, this skill also deteriorates. And that's learning a foreign language. If you have learned a foreign language and you're not practicing it, you're not speaking it, your skill will also deteriorate. That's one. The second part with learning programming languages is I think that programming languages become so much easy. And that's also what you see already happening with low-code platforms. But also if you need a program, a Python code with a certain input and a certain output, you nowadays can ask GPT to generate the Python code. And in most of the cases that Python code is pretty good and does the work that you need. And then you do not need the exact syntax anymore.
Yeah. And just on the last point, on the Python code, either you're writing it yourself because you learned it, or you're using one of these language models. Can you make an example when it would make sense that actually I'm a planner in an organization, as an example. Mm-hmm. What would be a good example to actually play around with such a Python code? The reason why I'm asking that, because usually, at least in more advanced organizations, you mentioned before, advanced planning tools, you have whatever, stock modeling tools and EBQ models and so on. So for what do I actually need that? Do you have an advice?
It's an interesting question that you ask, because you sketch it also in the concept that you have in a big organization, working with an ERP system, having a planning system on top of it. And then what you typically will experience is that an ERP system has a lifetime of 15 years, maybe 20 years. An APS system has a lifetime of 10 to 15 years. And the developments go at the moment so fast that if you would like to do something with Gen AI, it will take you a lot of time before you can implement it in your existing ERP or APS system. So what we typically see happening is that there become kind of systems of innovation on top of your ERP and APS system, where you can create a playground. And in this playground, you can do all kind of cool stuff with everything that is available. And especially there, it makes sense to have certain programming skills. But also there, I think this becomes more and more modular, and this becomes also more and more standardized. And here the interesting part is, where do you would like to go? Where do you would like to differentiate yourself? And that's also it's a question I get a lot these days. So if you start to look to AI, where should you start to invest in AI? Then there has been a report, I think a couple of months ago, I think it was from McKinsey, and they basically made a differentiation between takers, shapers, and makers. And takers are the ones that basically take off-the-shelf AI application and they start to use it. And a typical example is Microsoft Copilot. As you just take it off the shelf, you start using it, and it works seamlessly. Problem about it. And the problem is, it will also not be a differentiator. You can start using it. Everybody can start using it. It's not a big gain, or not a big pain to implement it. It's easy. So in a couple of months from now, or maybe a couple of years from now, everybody's using it. You're a lagger if you're not using it. So it will not differentiate you. It will not offset you from other companies. Then you have the shapers. And the shapers are the ones that basically take existing components and bring them together in a certain way in order to create new functionality that makes them different and is of a strategic advantage for that company. And I think that's what most companies should be doing in this direction. And then the makers are the ones that really start to develop the AI models themselves, the large language models themselves for their specific purposes. And I think that's the really big investments that are needed. So then we're not talking about millions, but at least tens of millions in order to develop those type of AI models. And I think that's only suitable for specific applications, specific type of companies where data privacy or security is of its utmost importance. So government, the defense industry, maybe energy infrastructure, those type of sectors, this is really taking place. But what I advise companies is have a look to your strategy. And based on that strategy, make a choice. Where will you be a taker and where will you be a shaper? Where would you like to differentiate yourself? And if it's something that is for efficiency purposes and it's just something that is part of your regular process, then don't try to be a shaper, but then be a taker and buy off-the-shelf technology. If it's really something that makes you a different company, then it's worth starting to shape, in that sense, develop your AI applications based on the existing components that are available on the market.
Yeah, I'm thinking a bit about, when I look back to the times I worked in these huge multinational organizations with tens of billions of turnover. There already, even before the AI hype, we had these data science teams, somewhere a hub in the world or multiple hubs worldwide, where we were building whatever, own algorithms, own small apps and this and that. In the SME, small, medium-sized enterprises, I haven't seen that. Also, when I talk to my network, I haven't seen that rarely, that companies really invest to have these specialist teams. So also there, I'm thinking if it's not also about the funding. I mean, you made a good point, like with the defense industry and so on. I fully get that. But then in the whatever consumer goods and whatever in the standard normal industries, where there's no protection or intellectual property rights issues so often and so on, I'm really wondering: is it about the size and the funding, the resources a company has, or is it really worthwhile to seek in supply chain for a competitive advantage? I mean, why do I say that? Of course, supply chain is in a competitive advantage, in my opinion, for a company. But I hope, maybe I'm naive, but I hope there are so many software providers and so on out there who will develop on-the-shelf tools, which we maybe fine-tune a bit for our company, for our needs, for our industry, for our setup, footprint, and so on. But so I'm actually asking, why would we? Let's take a consumer goods company as an example. Why would a consumer goods company even need to develop their own AI? I know it's a bit challenging, and provocative, but how would you respond to that?
I think it's not always about developing your AI, but it's about finding the right components that are out there on the market. And that can perfectly fit into this system of innovation, this platform on top of ERP APS. I think it will take a long time before the large ERP vendors and the large APS vendors will offer the same functionality. And that the small players, the scale-ups in this market currently can offer to companies. And the reason for it is pretty easy. They need to be very robust, very stable on large environments. That's not the environments where you can do experiments with. That's not playgrounds. That are not sandboxes where you can experiment with the functionalities and if it fails, it fails and you try something new. Because it's directly linked to all your processes that behind it. So I think those vendors, they will wait. And I think it's the domain of the smaller players that can start doing that. And I think there, you need to have a kind of experimental, entrepreneurial mindset in order to start using it. I think it's also there to try and to see how that works.
I like this impression, system of innovation. How did you call it?
Yeah, system of innovation. Yeah.
System of innovation, because I'm also thinking there are some big players. I'm not sure if we should say a name, but let's mention one which is super hyped. Also, if you're an investor or so, like Palantir, just picking them now because they are super hyped. They are making all these kind of boot camps at different companies. If you browse on the internet, you see so many, more and more stories. And why do I bring them? Because I have been recently in a discussion where some people think if companies would collaborate with Palantir or so, then actually you don't need multiple smaller systems. Like it's actually from the opposite of the systems of innovation. You have one partner who's giving you everything, sort of like this unicorn. Yeah, how we mentioned that before already. And that's also, I didn't make up my mind, to be honest. Yeah, should I believe in? I like more the flexible, smaller ones because otherwise you're getting very, very dependent also on a huge player again. Mm-hmm. Have you thought about it already? Like this, the super providers coming up now, or Era Technologies, I think, is also playing quite big in this field and so on.
They bring intelligence on top of ERP and APS systems, and I think what they also build up in a modular way. So they offer a full, or they try to offer a full suite of different functionalities on different analytical applications. And the way I see it is that they have multiple smaller innovation apps available, which they basically have smartly linked and composed together. And some are better than others, and some are better connected than others. So I think this is the collection of apps in a system with innovation that they try to offer. And part of it, I also think it's partly a bit hyped also. Maybe that's not a popular way of saying it, but it's also a bit hyped. So part of the intelligence that they offer is also the intelligence that a normal planner would have looked like when he looks to a production plan or to a distribution plan. And then he sees also, hey, I have an overstock in this location and an understock on that location. And instead of triggering a replenishment order from the understock location, I should maybe balance between the two inventory points.
Yeah, maybe we can just need to laugh a bit on your last example, because I think where some of these companies, and again, it's not about saying they are good, they are bad. That's not about it. Yeah, but maybe they have learned to talk to executives very well. So to the management boards, because I was actually in my own life. I will not go into more details now. I have to say no names and so on, but exactly these examples what you just mentioned. Some people were so, wow, look at, we can zoom into the factory, into the network, into this and that. And you're right, actually, my team, myself, we could do the same thing. If we are as fast, I don't know, but let's say maybe. But we never maybe managed to show it, to tell it, actually, and to give these other decision makers outside supply chain especially, or really senior people, to talk to them in the right language and to give them the feeling, the options they can actually decide from. And so maybe that's also why some of these big companies, they are pitching it in a super good way where we can all learn from.
Absolutely.
So that's why I needed to laugh a bit when you mentioned this example.
Yeah, I think what they do very well is that they have very flashy presentations. The graphical user interface also really look nice. They typically show a map and you can zoom in. And then second is, they have the right buzzwords, which also at the moment generate attention. If you talk about AI or if you talk about generative AI, you have attention. if you would have been talking about inventory management and inventory balancing, and you did it in a boring ERP screen, or you made an extract in an Excel environment where you basically did the analysis, then you don't have the attention. But to a certain degree, the analysis is the same, especially when it's about this inventory balancing, to take this example again.
Yeah, we talk about inventory later maybe a bit. I already have it on my list while we were talking. I noted it down already. But in the beginning, you mentioned something, driver-based planning, driver-based forecasting, adjusting the drivers rather than understanding everything, how the whole models, etc. work. Mm-hmm. I quickly want to touch on that because I like this concept. Do you have, without of course disclosing companies or so, but do you have a good example where you recently worked on a project, either at university or maybe in your consulting life, mm-hmm. where you implemented something like that for a client, let's say, kind of around which drivers has this been? Like, is it like simple drivers like weather index and these kind of things, temperatures, or what do you have in mind when you talk about drivers, which go maybe beyond the very obvious ones? Do you have the examples for us?
That's an interesting question, because when we start to talk about driver-based forecasting, what most people immediately start to do is to think about macroeconomic indicators, maybe the weather and all these kind of drivers, which is sometimes even a projection or a forecast in itself on what will. What I think that we sometimes tend to forget is that we also have a lot of internal data and that we are not using. So there are also internal drivers possible. So next to extrapolating the historical sales, we can also look to how is our order book developing and what is the size of our order book, and is this growing or shrinking compared to what it was previous month, previous quarter, and what was the previous impact of that? What are the inventory positions in our network? Are the inventory positions at our customers going up or down? And what is the inventory position of competitors if we know that? Things like that are also drivers that we can use. And part of that data is even internal information, like the order book or inventory position. And using that can be a very good first step. And we have proven with consultancy cases at our company EyeOn that this really already brings a lot of benefit. Then the second part is that you start to look to external drivers. And those external drivers, that is more challenging. In that sense, what we typically do is that we start with a workshop where we, with business experts, with people from marketing, people from sales, try to figure out what drives your market. What do you see as good indicators? And that can vary a lot, and that can be, for example, legislation about. I was last week talking to a company in the plastics industry, and they were on bioplastics, and they were talking about how legislation is evolving. If governments say, "Hey, we're gonna prescribe that a certain amount of bioplastic should be used, or a certain amount of recycled plastic should be used," that immediately has impact on their business. So they're looking more on how those type of drivers are evolving and building scenarios around that in their demand plan. And there can be models used, but not always. Sometimes also scenario assumption-based models.
Yeah. I like the part on internal drivers. I actually really, when I talk about driver-based planning, I talk about this leading indicators, external factors a lot. But you are right. We should maybe start with the data we already have, let's say, close to our fingertips, let's say. The last thing I have in mind on this whole data topic and tool topic is self-learning models, or maybe before we go there, like even planning, let's start with planning parameters. This is very obvious, like lead times, production routings, like output units per hour or whatever. We talked once already about these parameters and how to maybe automate kind of the review and the update and the whatever system you use. Mm-hmm. And I would love to really quickly talk to you about it, because I really see a lot of planners, they understand the importance of data. But still, it's always a pain in the neck to constantly keep it up to date. And again, there's more volatility these days. We all know these stories, right? So you need to adjust it up or down constantly, this kind of parameters. What do you see there? Is there some good work, good tools already out there to automate that a bit more, that the planners don't need to do it manually?
I think that this is a typical example where a system of innovation or an app in a system of innovation framework can play a role. What for example, we do is that when a company is implementing an APS system, is defining the process, but majority of the work is also in having the master data right. And then you figure out that a lot of the master data from the past wasn't well maintained, is outdated. And what you then have to do is basically determine what is the correct setting. And during such an implementation, there are a lot of things happening in parallel. You would like to do this as easy and as lean as possible. So what you typically see happening is that we then do data analysis and make use of all kinds of intelligence to determine what are the right parameter settings by mining the past. For example, lead times is something you can basically derive. And then you can come up with the right parameter set. That is step one. Step two is that you start to do this proactively, so that you not only do this once off because you're in your APS implementation, but you start to do this structurally by setting up maintenance cycles. And I think that is almost a hygiene factor to have that in place, but that is not for every company the case. And then combining that with intelligence, that you also then can start to automatically propose what the new parameter should be every month or every quarter. Or that you even start to look to correlations between parameters. So if there is a disruption in a certain geographical region, that you also know that that basically means that all the suppliers in that region will be impacted because the shipping lane is facing a delay, that you automatically start to update them all at once instead of waiting until you see it coming back in the data. And I think there is a lot of value to be gained. And I think this is a typical example of what a system of innovation on top of an ERP and APS can do, because APS systems and ERP systems are not particularly good at this.
Excellent. So if you are fine, Ieke, I would like to switch a bit topic.
Mm-hmm.
And before we go to the inventory topic, I forgot that because we started immediately so good. I just wanted to go quickly back to you. You know, I have this icebreakers. It's in German, but I try to quickly translate. I would like to. I'm just picking up something.
I think if you do it in German, I can understand it as well.
Fine. I can translate it. I will do two questions. I'm in the trade-off category. You need to really, I know for you it may be very hard because you're so clever and smart and outspoken on many topics. But here it's really about, you need to choose. And I ask you in this trade-off category, you cannot say it depends and this and that. You need to choose if you need to make a hard decision now. And the question is, what do you either not do? Like in German, I would say just-in-time deliveries or safety stock?
Just-in-time deliveries.
The second one, innovative suppliers or having own production?
Ziet het af, own production.
Okay. And the last one? Yeah. And the last one, would you rather have a wide product portfolio or would you rather offer more services as part of your supply chain portfolio?
I would go for the services part.
Okay, very good. And then let's try to pick another one. This is a good one. It's the insights category. I will quickly say it in German and I translate for you. Was ist passiert? So, what was one of the last challenging working days where you were not very satisfied actually when you went home, and what did happen?
That's a good question. That was a couple of weeks ago. I had a report out of a project. We did the report out of the project, and we were in the management team of this company. We told our story. The managing director basically asked, after we were finished with the presentation, we searched for interaction during the presentation. Everybody was silent. And at the end of that presentation, the managing director asked, is there somebody that would like to add something? And then nobody said something. And then he thanked us for the presentation and we left. And that felt so strange. And then I had a phone call later that week. I asked him what happened. And then the feedback was, well, actually, they were impressed, but there was also a kind of fear in the organization. And that fear in the organization was for me a symptom that improvement in this organization will be very challenging. Because if you would like to make improvements, culture is for me the one thing that will make a difference. Because if that person or that management team is so driven by fear that nobody dares to speak up, that will be then improvement will be very hard.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this buzzword now, we can always say it's psychological safety. Yeah. which is important. So I don't want to talk that negative. But thank you very much for these insights. I was really thinking a lot. Do we talk S&op, IBP? Because you are really, really also having a lot of very good opinions on that. But I would love to take a more basic topic, inventory, as I already said. Because also recently, actually, I get sometimes also emails where people ask me, I'm a supply chain manager here and there. Now, lately there was somebody from textile industry also approaching me. Martin, do you have an advice? I'm challenged to do this and that inventory reduction program. Where do I start, etc.? And so I would quickly like to start talking about that topic, because also I see you on LinkedIn posting recently a lot about inventory modeling and tools and calculations. We have talked a bit about multi-echelon inventory. So I would like to start, as I said, very basic. So if somebody approaches you, Ieke, come help me to improve inventory. How would you actually start? What are the first kind of questions, the things you look at? And then we can get a bit more complicated to the more advanced techniques.
It's a very interesting question, Martin. But my first question would be, do we know how the inventory is composed? And inventory composition is for me form and function. Form is what is raw material, intermediates, finished goods, spare parts, this type of differentiation. Function is for me about, is it safety stock? Is it cycle stock? So it comes from the fact that you produce in batches or you need it to order in lot sizes. Is it for strategic purposes? Is it there for management decisions, or is it quality blocked, or is it in transit? So I'd like to understand how it is being composed. And what I think is a pitfall that is often made is that consultants or supply chain analysts, they love to dive into a topic where they can start to make calculations. Safety stocks are the ones that you have a lot of formulas in our textbooks written with a lot of formulas in it that you can start to apply and make nice calculations. But if the safety stock is just a small fraction of your total inventory, then better take one of the other categories to work on. So if the cycle stock is majority of your inventory, then let's set up a project where we can work on the optimal lot sizes, on the rhythm wheels, and that's typically more challenging because this is on the cross-functional boundary between supply chain planning and operations, because if you talk lot sizes, then also operations manufacturing has an opinion about it.
Yeah, actually, but on inventory, a lot of people have opinions about it. I'm also smiling a bit. It's a really important topic. It's not to laugh about, but the resilience topic, which comes a lot now from sales and also whatever CEOs and board members. How can we be more resilient? It's a very, very good question. It's very good that companies taking care of that. But very often you start in the beginning before you get also there more advanced with inventories, because that's the most easy buffer if you have at least have the shelf life and whatever, and if you have the funding in the company to build inventories or hold them. Then one of the first measures is throw inventory at a problem, then you have better cover for any whatever abnormalities. And I'm also wondering, have you come across already projects where you needed to build in next to the whatever cycle stock and safety stock to build in kind of resilience? And do you mingle that in these whatever? Do you put it into whatever your safety stock formula and you make it a bit more complicated, or is it for you just because it's a different function of inventory? If you would go for that as a corporation, how would you then set the right stock for resilience, and how do you actually use it or never use it? Because safety stock is there to be used sometimes. A resilience stock, maybe not. You just need to keep it fresh and rotating. Yeah. Do you have an opinion about it?
I'm a consultant, so I always have an opinion. No, but I see it in a hierarchy. So when you talk about resilience, it goes also back to the famous supply chain triangle. There are multiple buffers in a supply chain, and that can be lead time, it can be capacity, and it can be inventory. Now, working on lead times, having typically or lengthening the lead times, is typically not accepted by sales and marketing. So that's something we cannot do. Capacity is often costly, but what you see more and more companies working on resilience is that they go for a two-supplier strategy or two-site manufacturing strategy, and go more for regionalization, which is the longer-term part of resilience. And there is a certain part of the buffers that needs to come from inventory. And then if you look to inventory, I think there can be a split made between, is it supply uncertainty that you can typically model, and then it becomes part of your safety stock formulas. But in most cases, when it's about resilience, it's also more about a managerial decision with how much buffers do you would like to have. And for me, that is then more a kind of managerial decision, a resilience decision to have a certain buffer, rather than that it is a safety stock. And what I then typically recommend also to supply chain leaders is earmark this inventory also. This is a managerial decision where we basically decided to have it for resilience purposes. So if this stock gets aged, get obsolete, or whatever happens because the market dynamics have changed, ideally you try to prevent it from happening. But let's face it, it will happen one day. Then we need to say, okay, but this was a collective decision. So also solve it together instead of making it the problem of the supply chain leader.
Yeah, I think also this, I think we need to teach our systems to actually know that whatever the new stock type, resilient stock or however we call it. And also I think I also started at the very beginning when I was involved in some of these resilience discussions, we make it part of the safety stock equation. We just increase the Gauss factor, the service level, let's say, in very basic start, yeah. And then, but the more we talk in the business, I also think maybe we don't want to have this resilience stock available for all customers and so on. Where a safety stock is typically there for all customers which are sourcing or buying that product. A resilience stock, maybe you reserve it, I'm just making up things now, yeah, for A customers, for a certain region or for a certain sales channel, because that sales channel, if that's bleeding out, that's a real problem, maybe for society, for whatever, yeah, or for the company from a profitability point of view. That's also, but also there, I have never really, I mean, I've been involved in a lot of debates, and I'm also changing my mind still constantly how to really calculate. Maybe we cannot even calculate it at all, the right resilience stock.
There are two parts in it. So I think small disruptions you can cover with the safety stock part. So if you say, well, I have a disruption in my transport lane and it takes a week longer, and that's something kind of uncertainty that you can model and can basically include in your safety stock. And then the question is, how much of those risks do you would like to observe? But the real big disruptions are things we cannot make up our mind that they will happen. And that's the thing. Therefore, you need to have separate stocks. And in certain industries, like, for example, the life sciences industry, it's very important to have certain large amount of strategic stocks, because basically they are obliged to have it, because you need to be able to serve if life is at risk. It triggers me to one other thing, as do we really model supply chain resilience in the right way? And do we really know how we should look to supply chain risk? And typically, if you do a risk assessment and you would do an assessment looking to what is the probability, what is the impact and the detectability, and you looked at to the suppliers that you have, then typically you make a Pareto, and then the biggest suppliers are the ones that you build in the most buffers. But it can be that the supplier that is just supplying one small ingredient or one small component in your bill of material is still critical for delivering everything. And then you come to the field of supply chain resilience modeling, making use of time to survive and time to recovery models, where you basically start to look what is the impact if a certain material or a certain component is not there, or what is the impact of a certain supplier cannot deliver. How long can I survive my supply chain? How long can I act normally? And that is something, is a measure you would like to compare to how long does it take me to find an alternative sourcing or an alternative recovery mechanism. So the time to survival and the time to recovery need to match. And that helps you then in defining the optimal strategy there. And that can be stocks, but it can also look into, okay, maybe we should have a second or a third supplier in place, and we should have more own capacity.
Or maybe even having special products for these cases, which are like crisis SKUs or however we call it, yeah? Not go now into more details.
Or reduced product portfolio. I think there was a famous case during the pandemic that a pasta supplier, instead of offering all the variants of pasta, that they said, we just have two variants at the moment because we are in a crisis mode. And when they normalized, they started to offer the normal range again.
Yeah, absolutely. Then on inventory, back to the normal, let's say, inventory discussions. And I really, really like the sidestep quickly to resilience, safety stocks, lot sizes, etc. You mentioned already a bit of that. I think one of the big, in my career, the biggest inventory reduction actually came from logistics footprint change, like closing warehouses, to be very direct. Yeah. Because the less locations you have where you need to hold a stock, obviously, the less safety stock in absolute sum, or in sum, let's say you have, the less you swallow a bit more the demand volatilities, supply volatilities. etc. So I also always say, look, not only challenge us in planning, maybe look a bit at the footprint. Yeah, should we do something there? But then talking a bit about the connection, raw, packed material, semi-finished goods to finished goods. This typical mighty echelon. I have read a lot about it in the past. I know there are tools available from various software providers and also consultancies like yourselves and so on. In practice, I find it very, 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 very hard to really practically do something with it because it's actually more data, difficult to come up with a robust model. In the worst case, in the organization, the raw and pack materials are in the hands of operations in a factory. Goods are in the hands of maybe a central planning team, so that already caused some conflicts in the discussions and alignments. How do you go about it? Have you really seen a very, very successful multi-echelon implementation, or is it really a very long-term, difficult undertaking?
Now, I have seen them, but I must also say not a lot of them, because like you described, these are very challenging problems and very challenging projects, and it requires also an organizational setup of a company to be ready for it. It's too easy to say, my working capital is too high, I have squeezed out the maximum with the regular safety stocks, now I go to multi-echelon. Because this requires a bit more in the transformation, because you need to organize yourself as a value stream. Because in this value stream, you can optimize throughout the chain that is being impacted. Because in multi-echelon can happen that you have to sacrifice your service level upstream for a better service level downstream. And the customer is not experiencing it, but if you are the upstream one, then it feels like you're not doing a right job. So you need to organize yourself across this value stream and have an integral view on that. Then the way to calculate it, that's the challenging part. And there you have, and for me, that's the cool part, because there you can start to work with simulation-based optimizations, where you make use of reinforcement learning in order to find the optimal balance between the different echelons. There's a lot of cool stuff happening in that field. But in essence, it's balancing different poolings. So like you described with closing warehouses, basically that's bringing demand together, and then you start to pool demand, bring uncertainty in one node instead of in multiple nodes, and therefore you gain safety stock. But there is also an effect that if you have longer replenishment lead times, and of course shorter replenishment lead times are better than longer replenishment lead times, but let's face it, sometimes manufacturing needs really time. But the longer replenishment lead time is, that your amount of safety stock is not growing linearly with the lead time, but is following a square root. So basically also that effect is dampening. So if you have, for example, global supply chains with regional stock points, then pushing inventory more downstream instead of keeping it centrally is an example of lead time pooling. Now, and all those effects together basically start to work with each other, against each other. They have lot sizing still playing a role. That makes it interesting puzzles. Now, with simulation-based optimization, you can come to an answer. But then the challenge that we often see is you have a one-off instance of an entire supply chain that you have modeled, and you have on every node and every item, you have calculated the optimal setting in a multi-echelon way, and you implement it. And 3 months later, reality has changed. And reality has changed, make your parameters outdated. So how to deal then with this situation? And I think there are, in the meantime, good ways to do that. One of the things that we often do is that we then, for example, work with decision trees. So what we basically do is, based on the optimal settings, we derive decision trees that basically help you to maintain those settings. And they prove to be quite robust for quite a long time. They will not last for eternity, but they give a direction on maintaining those parameters. And that can easily be maintained by planners themselves.
Yeah. Excellent. I think we are approaching the full hour already. So bringing it to an end, I think we could talk another hour, but maybe that's then for another podcast or so. So also anybody who's watching it on YouTube or listening on Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever, you can also comment and ask for things where we want Ieke maybe back here to elaborate a bit further. But I wanted to ask you, let's say in a tactical horizon, the next 12 months, what are you looking forward to? It can be business, private, whatever you would love to share. What are your plans, your ambitions, your wishes?
That's a really good one. One of the things I'm looking forward to myself is to start to study myself again. So I think what you described yourself is that we differ a few years in age. But I'm also working now around 25 years. I'm mid-career. I also have to learn new skills, and that's one of the things I would like to spend time on. So follow a good number of good courses. That's what is my intent for 2025.
Not a second PhD or so.
No, definitely not. Something more practical.
Okay, very good. Very good. And yeah, use LinkedIn to share it. I think you always write good stories. And I really love that people are sharing also a bit more wisdom and opinions and not just, I've been promoted here and I've been successful there. So I really, really would love that we more and more read also from all our network and colleagues to inspire each other and learn with each other, etc. I'm really, really glad that you took the time to talk to me and let the audience also being part of that. I really appreciate that. You have a lot of wisdom, and what I like about you, you really have a good combination of very strong theory, but I have seen you also in practice to really also hit the ground in a positive way and actually move things forward. That's a very good combination. The very last question, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect? What's the best way?
Reach out to me via LinkedIn. My name is pretty unique, so you will find me easily, and then you find also my contact details, so you can connect to me. I love to talk about supply chain. So if you reach out and you have a supply chain challenge, happy to talk to you.
Excellent. And I will also post your profile or the link to your profile, better to say, in the show notes that people can find you. Ieke, thank you very much for your time and talk to you very soon.
Hey, thank you, Martin. Thanks for having me.